All right, everyone. A couple days ago, Vox put out a tweet, and they had like a little story that they linked there. I can't remember whether it was to their own news site or an off-site service. And they told the truth accidentally, and this was pointed out to them by numerous non-fans of theirs and people who just lurk their page. I find it funny. They've got hundreds of thousands or over 1 million people following them on Twitter, and they struggle to get as many likes or retweets as I do with like 45,000. I think there's a difference in audience engagement and/or a lot of botting done by the corporate media. In all honesty, I think a lot of people just sort of sign up for anyone that's recommended, and so you have all this bloat on these pages that really aren't even worth paying attention to. They accidentally told the truth about firearms, which is that roughly 60% or so, number changes year over year, of all U.S. Firearm deaths are suicide. That is that the majority, when they tell you, when the liberals clamor for gun control, which is to say disarmament like boiling the frog style disarmament. They've done this for a number of decades. They've done this since the Jim Crow era with the Cruikshank decision, where the Democrats, the Southern Democrats, argued that the Second Amendment was didn't guarantee an individual right to keep and bear arms. And they did this because they were afraid that black people that were now citizens would get firearms. They wanted to be able to disarm the black population. That is the history of gun control in this country. No one at Vox will ever be honest enough to say this. The history of gun control in the U.S. starts and ends with segregation-era rhetoric. Literally with Jim Crow. It ends with a bunch of right-wingers, supposedly horrible, bigoted individuals, ending what had been an over-century-long policy of confiscation and disarmament based on the fact that it was not protecting, that the Second Amendment was interpreted as not protecting an individual right to keep and bear arms, despite the fact that it's fairly obvious that that was the actual intent, because the militia at the time was private citizens that had their own guns. They formed the militia. But, never mind about that. We'll not get off track for the moment. We'll talk about Vox. But this is a problem, because anytime that gun crime statistics or gun death statistics are cited, they're cherry-picked. They're cherry-picked heavily by groups that have some sort of a political or social axe to grind. This comes right on the heels of hogwash at the Michael Moore rally there. Number one anti-gun so-called kid himself. Kid for purposes of silencing critics by getting them shut off offline for bullying or whatever, harassment, even though that's moronic. Michael Moore had to take the microphone away from him because he started going off about wanting Canadians to donate to U.S. political campaigns and saying crazy shit. And Michael Moore was like, I think became a little uncomfortable because he's far left. Even he's nowhere near that far left, though. Even Michael Moore knows better than to suggest election tampering by foreign entities. I think we're having a national conversation about that right now. But yes, indeed, when people tell you about how the U.S. supposedly has so many gun crimes, you've got to understand when we look at gun crime or gun death, they're misleading. The way in which the FBI specifically tabulates gun crime is different from the way that all those other supposedly safe countries tabulate it. That is, gun deaths in the U.S. seem artificially high in part because we count suicides in that total, not separately. In Europe, I believe they tabulate them separately at first. You can get the joint number. It's fairly easy to derive. But then you've got to understand, if you were to ban guns altogether, you'd get a lot less gun-related suicides. But the suicide rate wouldn't actually fall significantly. None of these studies differentiate what would happen to other forms of suicide. Hanging, asphyxiation, taking a dip with the brave little toaster, poisoning yourself. These are never actually mentioned. Suicide, when Vox is trying to support gun control by invoking suicide on Suicide Prevention Awareness Day, it's really, really funny because it wouldn't prevent any suicides. You just get more people Robin Williamsing themselves or Anthony Bourdaining themselves. Supposedly he killed himself. I think the jury at this point may still be out based on his Weinstein and Clinton comments and his connection to Argento and all these other people. Just a little bit of a conspiracy theory that I think happens to have a little bit of credence and is a bit creepy to me. A little bit, too many connections. But yeah, here's the thing. Vox accidentally told the truth, and then they were shamefaced. But when you confront these sites, they basically just spit stuff out. That is, that they won't hold a conversation on their views, even when it's pointed out that what they're posting defeats their own arguments. What Vox is posting here, which is meant to grandstand on, Suicide Prevention Day, and say, hey, we need to do something about all the gun suicides, inadvertently shows exactly the same truth that people who are pro-Second Amendment have been saying, which is, look, if you're looking at the gun crime stats, we're one of the only countries in the world that considers suicide in that class, once it's actually successful, to still be a crime. Attempted suicide is a crime in many parts of the world. What are you going to do, though? Disinter and try the corpse and throw the corpse in a jail cell for the person killing themselves? Toss their skeleton into a corner for suicides or something? I think they've already been punished enough if they were sad enough to kill themselves. But Vox ignores this morbid fact, ignores reality. Because at any other time, if they weren't trying to grandstand, they would never trot these statistics out. It's something, I can't remember the exact number. It's like 30-something thousand gun deaths, and then it's like 20,000 some odd suicide. You've got to also understand, if you take that final number, which is already quite a bit smaller, now fix for the number that were the result of accidents, because unfortunately sometimes people are stupid, or a kid grabs dad's gun, accidentally shoots someone. Thankfully that's more rare, but accidental shootings, hunting accidents especially in rural areas, that's some hundreds or thousands of them. Of the remnant, which is less than 10,000 gun deaths per year in the entire United States that are actually inflicted and involve more than one person, how many of those are gang shootings? How many of them relate directly to the drug war or happen in about a half a dozen very blighted urban zones like Chicago or Washington, D.C.? The vast majority of them. Oh, yeah, that's right. See, outside of those zones in the United States, you're as safe as if you were backpacking through Switzerland. Arguably safer because there are so many guns on the street that people who are, murderous, they tend to get blown away at a fairly high rate. Tends to suppress some of these people. Yeah, occasionally you're going to get a serial killer or a mass murderer. Back in the 80s, mass shooters were not the main moral panic of the pearl-clutching left. It was serial killers, specifically satanic ones like Ramirez or something. They were worried, oh my God, they're everywhere, they're multiplying. Now, that was never true. It was never actually the case. The real crime spree was related to gang violence in a few inner cities, urban zones generally, gang violence. It was related to the drug war, sort of the push to attack the drug dealers. That's what really caused all of the crime sprees of the 80s and into the 1990s. It was bad government policy, essentially, twain with, in some cases, gun control. Now that Crookshank's been shot down and the judiciary has finally recognized that the proper role of the Second Amendment is to protect the individual right to keep and bear arms, because individuals comprise the entirety of the militia, separate from a military which at the drafting of the Constitution in its form today did not exist. It was an all-volunteer force, led by people who in many cases had already done soldiering for foreign states. They were Hessians, or they were generals in the British Army beforehand. That's the actual purpose of it. Now that we've recognized that, we can begin to peel back existing gun control, I think, rendering everything nice and constitutional so that we can have our firearms and defend ourselves appropriately. And it's like that case where the cop there, I was talking about it on the Drunken Peasants last night, walked into the wrong apartment and gunned some dude down. Well, if he had castle doctrine, the hope is that he would have returned fire and killed her instead. He's on his own property, he has every right. He can do whatever, he can walk around naked if he wants. The fact that she made a mistake shouldn't cause his death, even though you might have an ameliorating factor. It's like she honestly did believe she was being burglarized. Okay, maybe an ameliorating factor, but he's still dead. His right to life was violated in that instance. Maybe that police academy there should have a little bit of extra training session to tell you, hey, make sure that maybe you're deficient in math. You couldn't read the numbers on the door, or you were just too fucking drunk to pay attention to them. Might be a little bit of a problem. That's about all. Peace out.